72 seconds. That's all the time between routine patrol and a moment that would define the next 40 years of his life. He didn't know it yet. None of them did. But the clock was already running. The water felt wrong that morning. Too warm, too still. The kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper and every breath louder. Specialist Fourth Class Daniel Reeves had grown up on water. Biloxi bayous, Gulf fishing boats, rivers that moved like they had purpose. This water didn't move like that. It moved like it was waiting. Danny was 21 years old, son of a Mississippi shrimper who'd taught him to read currents before he could read books. He'd joined the Mobile Riverine Force of the 9th Infantry Division because someone told him soldiers who understood water had an edge in the Mekong Delta. 4 months in country taught him the difference between understanding water and surviving it. The battered compass in his pocket, his grandfather's, carried through the Pacific in World War II, had guided 3 generations of Reeves men through every kind of water God put on Earth. His father's last words before deployment: "Water won't beat a Reeves. Not ever." Danny believed him then. He didn't know yet that in 47 minutes, that compass would be covered in something that wasn't mud. He didn't know the Viet Cong ambush team had been submerged in the canal vegetation for 6 hours, breathing through reed tubes, waiting for exactly this moment. He didn't know the river had already chosen. If you're watching this, you recognize that military history isn't just about tactics and technology. It's about the men who executed those missions under impossible conditions. This channel exists to tell their stories with the accuracy and respect they deserve, without glorifying war or simplifying the choices they faced. The Mobile Riverine Force operated in an environment unlike anything American forces had encountered before. Subscribe now and join those who refuse to let these experiences fade into footnotes. Because what happened in the next 72 seconds would prove something Danny's grandfather knew, but never told him. Sometimes the water wins. Sometimes all you can do is survive it.
Danny Reeves wasn't supposed to be there. Not really. College deferment, music scholarship, trumpet player with enough talent that Tulane had offered a full ride. But his father needed help with the boat after the hurricane season of '65 wrecked half the Biloxi fleet. And by the time the family got back on their feet, the deferment had lapsed. Draft notice came 3 weeks after his 20th birthday. He didn't run. Reeves' men didn't run. His grandfather had stormed Tarawa. His father would have gone to Korea if a shrimping accident hadn't taken 3 fingers and any chance at trigger duty. Danny enlisted before the draft could take him, specifically requesting riverine forces because, and he remembered laughing when he said it, "I've been on boats since I could walk." The recruiter didn't mention that Mekong Delta boats weren't shrimpers, they were floating targets. Armored troop carriers and monitor gunboats pushing through channels so narrow you could shake hands with the enemy on both banks simultaneously. But Danny adapted fast. He had that thing some men are born with, an internal compass for water, an ability to read current and wind and the way vegetation moves when something's wrong. By his 3rd month, his platoon leader trusted Danny's instincts more than the maps. The compass stayed in his pocket, always, not for navigation, for connection. His grandfather had carried it through 6 amphibious assaults. His father had it on every boat he ever captained. Now it was Danny's turn to prove the family could handle whatever water threw at them. What he couldn't prove was how to sleep through the rain. Every tropical downpour brought the same nightmare. The canal, the reeds, the moment everything went wrong. He'd wake up tasting river water that hadn't touched his mouth in weeks. The other men didn't talk about their nightmares. Neither did he. You carried it. That was the deal. But the compass was getting heavier. Not physically, just heavier. The Mekong Delta wasn't terrain. It was a living maze that killed Americans by the dozens every week in ways training never covered. 3,000 miles of rivers, canals, and tributaries connecting rice paddies, villages, and supply routes that stretched from Cambodia to the South China Sea. The Viet Cong didn't just operate there. They'd been born there, raised there, knew every hidden channel, every treacherous current, every place to hide underwater and wait for American boats to pass. U.S. strategy was straightforward: control the waterways, interdict enemy supplies moving south, pacify Din Tuong, Kien Hoa, and Vinh Long provinces, cut the arteries, kill the insurgency. The 9th Infantry Division's Mobile Riverine Force was the implement. 40-ton monitor gunboats mounting 40mm cannons and 81mm mortars. Armored troop carriers hauling infantry through hostile water. Navy-Army cooperation in an environment where the U.S. theoretically had every advantage: firepower, armor, air support, communications. What they didn't have was 3 generations of men who'd grown up knowing which reeds hide snakes and which hide soldiers, which mud swallows boots and which mud swallows entire squads. The VC weren't just fighting in the Delta, they were the Delta. And the river didn't care about firepower. Danny's unit, 2nd Platoon, Company B, 3rd Battalion, 47th Infantry, had been operating in Kien Hoa Province for 2 weeks. Routine interdiction patrols, stop sampans, check cargo, search for weapons. Most days it was rice and fish and frightened farmers. Some days it was AK-47s hidden under fishing nets and faces that showed no fear at all. The mission briefing that morning was standard: patrol the canal network south of Ben Tre, search for supply caches, return by 1400 hours. Standard. Danny checked his compass out of habit before boarding the ATC. Still pointed north, still worked, still heavy. He didn't know that in less than 90 minutes, he'd be making a choice his grandfather never had to make. That the promise he'd made to his father, that water would never beat him, was about to become the cruelest kind of joke. Stories like Danny's don't survive in official records. They survive because people share them. The Mekong Delta claimed thousands of American lives, but each one of those lives was a complete human being with family, dreams, and skills that should have led somewhere other than hostile water 9,000 miles from home. If you served in Vietnam, or knew someone who did, the comment section below isn't just a place to type. It's where these memories live on. Add yours. Because what happened to Danny that day wasn't unique. It was the Delta, and the Delta always collected. The VC guerrilla commander watching Danny's convoy that morning was named Nguyen Van Thinh, 43 years old, father of 5, fisherman before the war, fighter during it, and someone who'd seen French riverine patrols die in these exact waters 12 years earlier using tactics the Americans were now repeating with better equipment and identical ignorance. Thinh wasn't cruel. He was competent. His men called him Crocodile, not because he was vicious, but because he could wait motionless in water for hours, then strike with absolute precision. He'd lost 2 sons to American artillery. His wife and daughters lived in a village the Saigon government officially controlled, but VC actually ran after dark. He fought for reasons that made sense to him: land, family, independence from foreign powers who kept promising democracy while bombing rice fields. His ambush team that morning included 11 men, 8 of them local to Kien Hoa province. They knew the canal system the way Danny knew Biloxi Bay, by instinct, by feel, by knowledge passed parent to child. The youngest was 17, the oldest 52. They'd submerged themselves in the reed beds at 0300 hours, breathing through hollow bamboo tubes, weapons wrapped in waterproof cloth, perfectly camouflaged in vegetation they'd grown up harvesting for roof thatch and basket weaving. They weren't suicidal. They were patient. American boats passed this canal junction twice a week. Eventually, one would be vulnerable enough. Eventually, the timing would be right. Thin didn't hate the Americans personally. He simply understood what his French enemies had learned too late. The Delta protects those who respect it and drowns everyone else. The Americans respected firepower. They respected armor. They did not respect the river. That was why they kept dying. They weren't wrong to believe their plan would work. The canal junction offered perfect ambush geometry, narrow approach, limited maneuver space, thick vegetation on both banks, deep mud preventing infantry from flanking quickly. They had command-detonated mines positioned underwater near the bank, B-40 rocket launchers pre-aimed at the lead boat's waterline, and automatic weapons sighted for the moment after the explosion when American troops would be disoriented and trying to return fire against invisible enemies. It was the same tactical setup that had killed French riverine forces in 1953. The weapons were more modern, the river was the same, so was the outcome, or so Thin believed. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was experience. He'd done this 14 times. Americans died, VC melted into the Delta, and the war continued. That was the rhythm. That was the reality. For Danny and 2nd Platoon, success meant completing the patrol without casualties and maybe, just maybe, interdicting weapons that could kill other Americans tomorrow. Failure meant body bags and letters home to Mississippi, Texas, Illinois, California. Tactically, this sector mattered because it connected VC supply routes from Cambodia to staging areas near Saigon. Strategically, the entire Mobile Riverine Force concept depended on proving American forces could dominate inland waterways despite VC home field advantage. Politically, Washington was watching this experiment to determine if riverine warfare could succeed where conventional operations had stalled. Danny didn't think about politics. He thought about making it to 1400 hours alive, about keeping his squad intact, about proving his father right. That water wouldn't beat a Reeves. What neither Danny nor Thin fully understood yet was that the river didn't take sides. It wasn't American or Vietnamese. It was older than both, patient beyond human measure, and utterly indifferent to flags, tactics, or courage. In 72 seconds, both men would learn what Danny's grandfather had known since Tarawa. Sometimes the mission succeeds, sometimes everyone dies, and sometimes, most terrible of all, you survive and spend the rest of your life wondering why. If you're still watching, you already understand something most people don't. That military history isn't about glorifying war. It's about honoring the people who fought them on all sides with the skills and courage they actually possessed. Subscribe now and join the community that refuses to let these stories become footnotes. And hit that like button. It tells YouTube these stories matter. Because in about 90 seconds of real time, Daniel Reeves and Nguyen Van Thin would both make decisions that combat training never covers. Both would demonstrate tactical proficiency under impossible pressure. And the river would decide who walked away. Touch came first. The boat's hull shuddered. Not from engine vibration, but from something beneath the waterline that shouldn't be there. Danny's hand was on the M60 machine gun mount when the vibration traveled through metal into his palm, a frequency wrong enough that his body understood the threat 3 seconds before his brain caught up. He'd felt boats hit submerged logs, sandbars, debris. This wasn't that. This was deliberate. His fingers tightened on the weapon before he consciously knew why. Then sound arrived. Not the explosion, that would come later, but the absence of sound. The Delta's constant noise signature, birds, insects, water lapping against hulls, cut off like someone threw a switch. Pure silence. Every veteran knows that silence. It's the sound of people holding their breath, the sound of ambush. Danny's ears picked up his own heartbeat, impossibly loud, and the metallic click of someone chambering around 2 boats back, and the wet squelch of mud shifting on the bank where nothing should be moving. 3 seconds. That's how long the silence lasted. 3 seconds to understand everything was about to go wrong. Sight came third, too late to matter. The water surface erupted 20 feet ahead of the lead ATC. Not an explosion, not yet, but reeds standing vertical as men emerged from positions they'd held for hours, black-clad figures materializing from vegetation like the Delta itself was giving birth to soldiers. Danny saw faces, saw a man not much older than him leveling an AK-47 with movements that spoke of absolute familiarity. Saw another raising a B-40 rocket launcher with the casual competence of someone who'd done this before and would do it again. Saw the ripples spreading from where the command wire for the underwater mine ran to the bank. Too many targets, too many angles. No clean shot at any of them. His training said, suppress the nearest threat. His instinct said, there is no nearest threat. They're everywhere. Smell hit fourth. Cordite hadn't reached his nostrils yet, but something else had. The specific organic rot of disturbed river bottom, the smell of mud that's been underwater for generations, mixed with something chemical he'd later identify as plastic explosive waterproofing. The Delta smelled like decay on good days. Today, it smelled like a grave opening. Taste came last, the one that would stay longest. Blood in his mouth before he'd been hit, before the firefight even started. He'd bitten the inside of his cheek when the boat shuddered. Copper and salt, and the specific acidic tang of absolute fear. That taste would come back at random moments for 40 years. In restaurants, at his daughter's wedding, during thunderstorms that sounded nothing like combat but brought it back anyway. The Delta got inside you through every sense. It stayed there. The explosion, when it finally came, was almost a relief. Something to react to. Something definite. The underwater mine detonated against the lead boat's starboard side, lifting the bow 3 feet out of the water before gravity and physics slammed it back down. Water turned white with cavitation, brown with disturbed silt, red with immediate casualties. Danny's boat was third in line. He watched 2 men thrown clear, one landing in the canal, one slamming into the opposite bank. Then the RPG hit the second boat's engine compartment, and everything became gunfire. Nguyen Van Thyn fired his first burst from 30 meters, targeting the M60 gunner on Danny's boat, the most dangerous threat to his team. Professional, tactical, correct. The gunner took 3 rounds across the chest and collapsed across his weapon. Danny grabbed the M60 before the body finished falling. Didn't think. Didn't aim carefully. Sprayed the reed line where muzzle flashes bloomed like flowers. Someone to his left was screaming. Words at first, then just sound. The canal was too narrow to maneuver. banks too steep to beach the boats and fight from solid ground. They were trapped in a kill zone the VC had selected, prepared, and now controlled. Thinn's men shifted positions constantly, firing in disciplined bursts, then moving, then firing again. They knew the Americans would call artillery. They knew helicopters would come. They had maybe 6 minutes to kill as many as possible before vanishing into the Delta's thousands of canals and tunnels. 6 minutes. That was the window. They'd practiced this enough to know exactly how long they had. They weren't trying to win the war in 6 minutes, just trying to kill Americans and survive. They succeeded at both. Danny saw the VC fighter who'd fired the first AK burst go down. Navy gunboat's 40mm cannon caught him in the open during a position shift, and there wasn't enough left to bury. Another guerrilla took his place within 10 seconds. No panic, no hesitation. They'd lost men before. They'd lose men today. That was the job. Fight, kill, survive if possible. They weren't suicidal. They were committed. There's a difference. The battle turned when artillery finally registered on target. Danny's radio man had been screaming coordinates since the first explosion. 105mm howitzers from the firebase 4 miles south began dropping high explosive into the tree line. Thin made the decision immediately. Break contact, scatter, regroup 2 canals over. He lived. 7 of his 11 men lived. They'd killed 6 Americans, wounded 13, and disabled 2 boats. By VC standards, successful ambush. By American standards, tactical setback. By the river standards, another day ending exactly as expected. What Danny didn't understand yet, what he couldn't understand while still returning fire and trying not to die, was that the water around his boat wasn't entirely water anymore. Wasn't entirely blood either, though there was plenty of that. It was something else, something thick, something that would coat his compass when he pulled it out later to confirm they were still heading north, still heading home, still moving in a direction that meant something. The compass needle spun freely. Couldn't find north. Couldn't find anything. The water had gotten inside it. The water that wasn't just water. The Delta had claimed his grandfather's compass. In 40 years, Danny would understand that the Delta had claimed more than that. 30 minutes after the ambush, the world felt almost normal again. The wounded were stabilized. The boats limped north toward the firebase. Someone made a joke about danger pay, gallows humor, the kind that only makes sense when you've just survived what shouldn't be survivable. Danny found himself laughing, which felt wrong until he realized everyone else was laughing too. Relief, pure animal relief at still being alive, still breathing air instead of river water, still capable of laughter instead of screaming. He pulled out his grandfather's compass. The needle spun uselessly, magnetism destroyed by whatever had gotten inside the casing. Water, blood, river silt, didn't matter. 3 generations of Reeves men had trusted this instrument. Now it was just metal and broken glass. He kept staring at it, as if looking harder would make the needle find north again. His father's promise echoed, "Water won't beat a Reeves." The compass said different. The compass said the river wins, always has, always will. On the opposite bank, Nguyen Van Thyn was conducting the same ritual of relief. 7 men survived. 4 were dead or dying. He'd done this enough times to process it clinically. Count the living, remember the dead, move to the next position before American reconnaissance helicopters pinpointed their location. One of the dead was his nephew, 19 years old, first ambush. Thyn had promised the boy's mother he'd keep him safe. He'd failed. The river didn't care about promises. It took what it wanted. But this was the cost. This was always the cost. You fought anyway. You promised anyway. You failed anyway. Then you kept fighting. What else was there? The relief lasted until the radio crackled with new orders. 15 minutes north, another platoon had been hit. Heavier ambush, more casualties, boats dead in the water. Medevac helicopters couldn't reach them. Ground fire too intense. Danny's boats were closest functional boats anyway. They were already damaged, already bloodied, already barely operational. Command was asking them to turn around, to go back into the Delta, to push through VC-controlled territory to reach Americans who were dying right now while waiting for help that might not arrive. Danny's squad leader, Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb from Detroit, looked at the platoon, looked at their faces, counted how many were wounded, how many were combat effective, how many were just holding it together through shock and adrenaline. Then he looked at Danny, for reasons Danny wouldn't understand until later. "Reeves, you know this water. Can we make it?" That was the question. Can we make it? Not should we try. Not is it tactically sound. Can we physically navigate shot-up boats through hostile canals to reach men who'll die without us? And Danny knew, he absolutely knew, that the answer was maybe. Maybe if nothing else goes wrong. Maybe if the VC don't hit them again. Maybe if the boats hold together. Maybe if the river allows it. What do? Not in a classroom, not during training, not in a scenario where you have time to think and options that don't all end badly. Right now, your boats are damaged, your men are wounded. You're being asked to go back into hell to save people you've never met, who might already be dead by the time you arrive. Every tactical instinct says this is how you get everyone killed. Every moral instinct says Americans don't leave Americans behind. And you have 30 seconds to decide before the radio asks again, before your sergeant asks again, before the clock runs out on men who are bleeding out in water that doesn't care about courage or honor or promises. What do you do? Danny looked at the broken compass, looked at the blood on the deck that no amount of river water would wash clean, looked at Webb waiting for an answer that would determine who lived and who died, and he thought about his father's words, about his grandfather carrying this compass through 6 amphibious assaults, about Reeves' men and water, and promises that shouldn't be possible to keep. He thought about the taste in his mouth, copper and salt and fear, and whether he could swallow that taste again so soon, whether his men could, whether any of them should be asked to. "We can make it," Danny said. It was a lie. He knew it was a lie the moment the words left his mouth. But it was the lie you tell when the truth, that water doesn't care about promises, is too terrible to speak aloud. Webb nodded. The boats turned south, back toward the Delta, back toward the VC, back toward water that had already taken the compass and was now asking for more. The promise Danny made to his father, that water would never beat him, became ash in that moment. Not because he broke it, because he realized his father had been wrong. His grandfather had been wrong. Every Reeves who'd ever believed they could master the water had been wrong. The water doesn't lose. It waits. It takes. And when you think you've survived it, when you think you've won, it reminds you that survival isn't victory. It's just delayed payment. The choice was made. The boats moved south, and the consequences were just beginning. The game changer wasn't American. It was meteorological. 20 minutes into their southern push, the sky opened. Not the usual tropical afternoon rain, a storm cell that turned the Delta from difficult to impossible in under 3 minutes. Visibility dropped to nothing. The canal system, already a maze, became navigable only by dead reckoning and prayer. Danny stood at the bow of the lead boat, trying to read the water through sheets of rain that felt like fists. Behind him, the boat's captain was steering by compass bearing alone, trusting Danny's hand signals because sonar was useless in water. This disturbed, and maps meant nothing when you couldn't see the landmarks. The rain was both curse and salvation. Curse because it made everything harder. Navigation, communication, simply seeing threats before they killed you. Salvation because it grounded the VC too. Ambush teams can't operate in zero visibility any better than Americans can. Thin's fighters, those who'd survived the earlier engagement and were now repositioning for possible second strikes, were forced to shelter and wait. The Delta was winning. The river was making the point it always made. Humans fight each other. Nature fights everyone. Danny's grandfather had taught him to read water by feel, to understand current by how the bow responded, to sense depth by the sound of the engines, to know when invisible obstacles lay ahead by the way ripples changed pattern. That knowledge, passed down through 3 generations of Reeves men who'd made their living on the Gulf, was the only reason the convoy didn't run aground or sink. Maps and technology failed. Instinct survived. He guided them through channels that shouldn't have been navigable, around mud banks that didn't appear on any chart, past villages where VC and civilians watched from doorways as American boats ghosted past in the rain. 40 minutes into the storm, they reached the ambushed platoon. What they found wasn't a platoon anymore. It was 11 men holding a perimeter on a mud bank while their boats burned behind them. The VC had withdrawn, couldn't press the attack in this weather, but casualties were catastrophic. 6 dead, 8 wounded. The platoon leader, a lieutenant from Virginia who'd been in country for 3 weeks, was holding his own intestines inside his abdomen with one hand and directing defensive fire with the other. He looked at Danny's boats appearing from the rain like ghosts and said, "Took you long enough." Then he passed out. The extraction should have been textbook. Load the wounded, secure the dead, abandon the burning boats, head north to the firebase with maximum speed. But the storm made textbook impossible. The canal was too narrow for proper boat positioning. The mud bank was too unstable for secure footing. And the VC, professional, patient, waiting, were close enough that Danny could hear them repositioning through the rain. Orders being given in Vietnamese, equipment being moved. They hadn't retreated, they'd just paused. When the storm cleared, they'd finish what they started. Sergeant Webb made the decision Danny couldn't. 40mm cannon, suppressive fire, pattern alpha, everything we've got into that tree line. It wasn't about hitting targets you could see. It was about making the tree line uninhabitable, about putting so much high explosive into probable enemy positions that staying there meant dying, about buying time measured in minutes to extract men whose time was measured in seconds. The gunboats opened up, 40mm cannons punching explosive shells into vegetation you couldn't see through the rain, tracers arcing into gray nothing. The sound was enormous, not just gunfire but the storm itself, thunder and artillery and human screaming all merging into one continuous roar. Danny worked the M60, firing at shadows, at movement, at nothing. You shoot because not shooting means dying. You shoot because that's the only thing you can control. You shoot because the river doesn't care, but maybe the firepower will. Nguyen Van Thien pressed himself into mud that was more water than earth and listened to American shells tearing apart the forest around him. 3 men of his 7 were dead now, 1 from the 40mm barrage, 2 from a tree that exploded and fell. He couldn't see the enemy, couldn't maneuver, couldn't coordinate fire with the other VC teams in the area, could only hold position and hope the Americans left before the shelling found him. This wasn't tactical brilliance. This was survival. Both sides were surviving. Nobody was winning. The river was winning. That was the truth the storm made explicit. It wasn't about firepower. It wasn't about tactics or training or superior equipment. It was about refusing to quit when quitting was the only logical choice. When every rational calculation said, withdraw, regroup, save who you can, and abandon the rest. Danny pulled wounded men through rain that made the boat deck slick with blood and water mixed until you couldn't tell which was which. Webb directed fire until his voice went hoarse. The lieutenant from Virginia stayed conscious just long enough to count his men as they were loaded. 11 rescued, 6 bodies recovered, 0 left behind, then died on the boat ride north before anyone could stop the bleeding. The stakes that had seemed so clear in the morning briefing, control the waterways, interdict supplies, demonstrate American capability, had simplified to something more fundamental. Get everyone home. That was the mission now. Not victory, not tactical success, just survival. And even that was negotiable. Even that depended on the river allowing it. The 9th Infantry could claim whatever they wanted in the after-action report. The Delta knew different. The Delta always knew. Victory came, but the cost was still being counted. 13 Americans died that day. Not numbers, not statistics. 13 specific human beings with names, families, hometowns, futures that ended in Mekong Delta water. Specialist Tommy Garrett, 20, Omaha, Nebraska, high school football star engaged to his childhood sweetheart 3 weeks from his 21st birthday. Corporal James Mendoza, 22, El Paso, Texas, mechanic who could fix any engine with improvised parts and had 2 daughters who'd never remember him. Private First Class David Chen, 19, San Francisco, California, pre-med student at Berkeley who'd enlisted because his father served in World War II and tradition mattered more than safety. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, 28, Detroit, Michigan, 3 tours, 2 Bronze Stars, career soldier who'd planned to retire and teach high school history. He died directing fire while bleeding from wounds he never mentioned. On the other side of the canal system, the VC casualties were no less human. Nguyen Van Thyn survived, but 4 of his 11 men didn't. Leminduk, 34, farmer and father of 3 who joined the VC after American artillery killed his eldest son during a grid square mistake. Pham Thanh Long, 17, too young to have a trade yet, who'd wanted to be a teacher before the war made teachers irrelevant. Tran Van Hua, 49, fisherman who knew every canal in Kien Hoa and used that knowledge to keep VC supplied until a 40mm shell found him through the rain. Vo Quang Tuan, nephew to Thin, 19, first mission, promised his mother he'd be careful. Each man carried a history. Each family got a loss. The river didn't distinguish. It took Americans who wanted to go home and Vietnamese who already were home. Equal opportunity, equal finality. 21 wounded Americans required medevac. Some would heal and return to duty. Some would go home missing pieces, literal and metaphorical. The lieutenant from Virginia who'd held his intestines inside himself with one hand died before the helicopter reached the field hospital. Not from the original wounds, but from shock his body couldn't overcome. 3 men lost limbs. 7 would carry shrapnel for the rest of their lives, setting off metal detectors and explaining scars to children who'd never understand. 4 developed infections from river water that got into wounds. The Mekong carried every kind of bacteria evolution ever invented. 1 lost an eye. Another lost the use of his right hand. The cost of the mission was counted in bodies, blood, and decades of consequences for men who survived but didn't get to call it victory. The aftermath was silence and rain. The storm hadn't stopped. The boats limped north through water that was brown with silt, red with blood, black with diesel from the burning ATCs they'd abandoned. Danny sat on the deck of his boat, the M60 finally silent, his hands still shaking from adrenaline crash, and watched the Delta slide past. It looked the same, exactly the same, like nothing had happened. Like 13 Americans and 4 VC hadn't just died in water that would carry their blood to the ocean and forget them by tomorrow. The Delta didn't remember. That was its mercy and its cruelty. Someone had covered the bodies with ponchos. They lay in rows, 3 on Danny's boat, 4 on the boat behind them. He knew their names, had served with most of them for months. Webb's body was 2 feet to his left, the man who'd asked Danny if they could make it. Danny had said yes, had lied, and Webb had died believing that lie was truth. That water wouldn't beat them, that Reeves' men could handle anything. The compass in Danny's pocket, still broken, still unable to find north, felt like evidence of crimes he couldn't name. He'd survived. Men who deserved to survive more than him hadn't. That's not guilt. That's math. Unfair, irrational, impossible to process math. The taste in his mouth was permanent now. Copper and salt and something chemical. He'd rinsed with canteen water 3 times. Didn't help. The Delta had gotten inside him through every sense. Touch, blood on his hands that soap wouldn't remove. Sound, Webb's last transmission still echoing. Sight, the lieutenant's face as he died. Smell, cordite and rot and rain. Taste, this, always this. For 40 years this. He didn't know that yet. He just knew something had broken inside him that the Delta water had gotten into, same as the compass. Something that wouldn't work the same way again. The promise he'd made to his father had died in that canal. Not broken, just revealed as fantasy. Water beats everyone eventually. His grandfather had known. His father had pretended otherwise. Danny was learning the truth the hardest way, by surviving when better men didn't. The compass couldn't find north because north didn't matter anymore. The only direction that mattered was away from the Delta, away from the water, away from the taste and the sound and the weight of carrying men who weren't heavy enough because they were dead. You can carry the dead all day. They don't complain. They just add up. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. He finished his tour, got on a plane, went home to Mississippi. His father asked if the water was as bad as everyone said. Danny pulled out the broken compass, said, "Water always wins." His father laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. It was the only true thing Danny had left, and the weight never got lighter. 23 years after the Mekong Delta, Danny Reeves still couldn't sleep through thunderstorms. Not because of the sound, because of what the sound brought back. The weight of rain that felt like fists, the taste of copper and salt, the moment he'd told Sergeant Webb they could make it when he'd known they couldn't. He'd built a decent life, married, 2 daughters, fishing charter business out of Biloxi, same docks his father had worked. People called him a good captain, patient, careful. The kind of man who checked weather reports 3 times before leaving port and never took risks with passengers aboard. His daughters didn't know why. His wife knew but didn't ask. The compass stayed in a drawer he never opened. Every few years he'd think about throwing it away. The needle was still broken, the casing still stained with something that wasn't mud and wasn't entirely blood either. But throwing it away felt like betraying his grandfather, who'd carried it through Tarawa. Keeping it felt like carrying evidence of his own failure, so it stayed in the drawer, closed, heavy, waiting. The nightmares never stopped. Different scenarios, same ending. He's in the boat. Webb is asking if they can make it. Danny says yes. Then everyone dies. Or he says no. Then everyone dies. Or he tells the truth, that water doesn't care about promises, and everyone dies anyway. The nightmare wasn't about the combat. The combat made sense. The nightmare was about the choice. About being 19 years old and asked to decide who lives and who dies based on whether you're willing to lie convincingly enough. Some choices don't have right answers. Some choices just have consequences. The Delta taught him that. He's been learning it ever since. He tried the VA, tried therapy, tried medication, tried not talking about it, then tried talking about it, then tried finding other Vietnam vets who understood the specific horror of riverine warfare in an environment that wanted everyone dead. Some of that helped, some of it didn't. Mostly, he learned that survival isn't the same as healing. You can survive something and spend 40 years dying from it anyway, just slower, just quieter, just in ways that don't show up on casualty reports. He'd Google Sergeant Webb sometimes, find his name on the Vietnam Memorial website, read the hometown newspaper obituary about a Detroit hero who died serving his country. Never mention that Webb died because Danny lied. That particular truth wasn't for newspaper obituaries. That truth was private, heavy, carried alone. He served honorably. His brothers served honorably. The VC soldiers on the other side, men like Nguyen Van Thien who fought for their homeland with skills and courage that matched anything American training produced, they served honorably too. They all did what they believed was right, with tactical proficiency and personal bravery that deserves recognition even when the causes were irreconcilable. Danny never hated the VC. He respected them. They knew the water better than he did. They used it better. They survived it better. That wasn't villainy. That was competence in a theater that rewarded local knowledge over firepower. The fault, when there was fault, lay in strategy and policy, in decisions made in Washington and Saigon by people who would never taste Mekong Delta water mixed with blood, who would never be asked at 19 whether they could navigate shot-up boats through hostile territory to save dying men, who would never carry a broken compass for 40 years as evidence that some promises are impossible to keep. The soldiers did their part, all of them, American and Vietnamese. They fought with skill, died with courage, and survived with costs the civilians who sent them never had to pay. The question is whether the leaders did their part, whether the strategies made sense, whether the outcomes justified the costs. Those are different questions. Those are the questions that matter. War creates heroes on all sides. It also creates tragedies on all sides. The courage of one doesn't diminish the courage of the other. Both can be true. Both should be remembered. Danny understands that now. Took 40 years, but he understands. Nguyen Van Thien, assuming he survived, assuming he's still alive somewhere in Vietnam, probably understands too. They were both just men trying not to drown in a river that didn't care who won. Some made it, some didn't. The water decided. That was the Delta. That was always the Delta. 47 years after that storm, Danny's granddaughter asked why he kept a broken compass in a drawer he never opened. He told her it belonged to her great-great-grandfather, that it had gone through World War II, that her great-grandfather carried it through Vietnam, that it doesn't work anymore because sometimes water wins no matter how hard you fight it. She asked if he'd fix it. He said no. Some things stay broken. That's how you remember they mattered. If you served or knew someone who served, their sacrifice was real. Their courage was real. The Mekong Delta claimed thousands of American lives and thousands of Vietnamese lives, each one a complete human being with families and futures. Subscribe and join those who refuse to forget. Share this story if you believe these experiences matter. And remember, honor the warriors, question the wars. Because the river doesn't choose sides. It only chooses survivors, and even the survivors carry it forever.